It's always fun to put your detective glasses on and try to figure out who killed whom. But no matter what era of history you look at, you'll always find unsolved cases of crimes and murders that were never solved, not even with all the best spies and detectives at hand. And some of these crimes were so bizarre and mysterious that they're still being talked about decades after they happened. In this video, Top 10 Best gives you a roundup of the top 10 murders and crimes that were never solved. Before we continue, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Let's begin. 10. Jack the Ripper. The district of Whitechapel in 1888 was a rather impoverished area. Thousands of people lived there in cramped up apartments, doing almost anything they could to survive. Women didn't really work desk jobs at the time, which led several to turn to prostitution to get by. Attacks against women usually occurred randomly and weren't raising any eyebrows until a spree of horrific murders that occurred between 3 April 1888 and 13 February 1891. 11 women were brutally murdered, and at least 5 of them were believed to be killed by the same person, Jack the Ripper. The police had several suspects and theories. Some detectives believed that the killer could be a butcher or a doctor because of the way the organs were removed from the bodies of the victims. DNA testing wasn't a thing, and forensics could only do so much. All this combined with the fact that the victims were all from the slums, so they weren't important enough, added to the fact that infamous Jack the Ripper killings remain unsolved to this day. 9. The Texarkana Moonlight Murder. The Texarkana Moonlight Murderer, aka the Phantom Killer, shook the city of Texarkana in 1946. His first attack was on February 22nd. He attacked a couple, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Larry, who were parked on Lover's Lane. He ordered them to get out of the car, and Hollis was struck in the back of his head with the attacker's gun, hard enough that it cracked his skull. He sexually assaulted Larry using the barrel of his gun. The two managed to escape and get some help. Once they recovered from their injuries, they were asked if they could identify the attacker but had conflicting descriptions of him, which led to no real help tracking him down. Getting through several murders unscathed, the Moonlight Murderer then went on to attack for the final time. This time, his victims were Vigil Starks and his wife Katie. The police had no living witnesses that could identify the killer. The only thing they could use to identify him was a flashlight, painted red at the top and bottom. The killer disappeared into the moonlight from where he came from, and his murders remain unsolved to this day. 8. Tupac Shakur. Tupac is one of the biggest names when it comes to the American music industry. He was a well-known rapper that turned heads wherever he went. In September 1996, he and other members of Death Row Records, the record label that Tupac was signed to, went to see a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand Hotel. When they were leaving the hotel later that night, one of the men from Death Row Records identified a man that had jumped him before, aiming to take his medallion, but had failed. 2 hours later, Tupac and Suge Knight were on their way to Suge's nightclub, 662. Their car was followed by Death Row security and several other cars that were part of their entourage and were heading to the club with them. At 11:10 p.m., their car stopped at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Caval Lane in front of the Maxim Hotel, where a car drove up next to them and fired shots directly at them. Tupac was hit with 4 bullets, twice in the chest, 1 in the arm, once in the thigh. Tupac died shortly afterwards. His killer got away and was never identified or apprehended. 7. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. On March 31, 1922, a family of 5 was brutally murdered in the Bavarian farmstead near Munich, Germany. The Hinterkaifeck family was never very social and mostly kept to themselves, but they were seen working outside of their farm almost every day. The killer had hit the family members repeatedly with a mattock, a farm tool similar to a pickaxe. Their bodies were found bludgeoned and decapitated. The neighbors got worried after day 4 and went to see where the family was and discovered the bodies. There was no conclusive evidence at the crime scene, and the brutal killer was never found. 6. The murder of Moll McCarthy. Moll McCarthy was an unwed mother of 7 who lived in the town of Marhill in Ireland. Each of her kids were said to be from a different man, and to sustain her home and provide for her kids, she would barter sexual favors and get food and services in return. On November 21, 1940, Harry Gleason, the nephew of the man that owned a farm that McCarthy would daily draw water from, found her body on the property with 2 gunshot wounds to her face. He reported the crime to the police, who in turn arrested him 9 days later, saying that he was the father of one of her children and was involved with her in immoral acts. Despite his pleas saying he wasn't guilty and that all he did was come across her body, the court found him guilty on 27 February 1941 and sentenced him to death. He was hanged and buried at the prison he was held in. In 2015, deficiencies were found in his case, and the court granted him a posthumous pardon. The real killer, however, was never found. 5. The Shimeyama Incident. 1949 had been a terrible year for railways in Japan. One train derailed in Fukushima on August 17th, and another crashed into the Midaka station in Tokyo on July 15th. Just before the second incident, Sadanari Shimeyama, the first president of the Japanese National Railway, laid off 30,000 workers under the Dodge Line policy of the government. Sadanori's severed dead body was found 2 days later on the Yoham line between Kita Shinju Station and Ai Station. He had been run over by a train. Some said that he couldn't take the guilt of laying off 30,000 employees and just went to the tracks to kill himself. The official report said that he was dead before being hit by a train, but who killed him was a mystery that was never solved. 4. The Ardlamont Mystery. In 1891, the Hambro family lived in the Ardlamont estate in Argyll in Scotland. They appointed Alfred John Monson, a local reverend son, as a tutor for their own 17-year-old son, Cecil Hambro. 2 years later, on 10th of August 1893, the two went out for a hunt in the forest next to the home. Cecil was found dead shortly afterwards. At first, the authorities didn't suspect that there was any foul play and were about to rule the death an accident. But then they found out that 6 days before he died, Cecil Hambro had taken out 2 life insurances, both worth £20,000, and the beneficiary was Monson's wife. This gave Monson motive, and he was arrested for the murder of Hambro. However, the jury found him not guilty. The real truth behind Cecil Hambro's death remains a mystery to this day. 3. The Beautiful Cigar Girl. Mary Cecilia Rogers was a girl known for her beauty. She worked at a local tobacco shop as a clerk, and whenever she was in the store, men would come in to make purchases just so they'd have an excuse to get to talk to her. On July 25, 1841, she told her fiancé, Daniel Payne, that she was going to go visit her family. 3 days later, her body was found floating in the Hudson River. Her death was infamous all over the country. All leading newspapers reported on the death of the beautiful cigar girl and sensationalized her death. Mary's fiancé was accused of murdering her, while other popular theories suggested that she was either killed in a failed abortion attempt, became a victim of gang violence and was thrown into the river, or committed suicide and jumped in herself. None of the theories were ever proved, and the case was never solved. 2. The Teal Pond Mystery. Hazel Drew was a regular 20-year-old girl who lived in Taborton Mountain in Sand Lake, New York. She worked as a governess at the home of Professor E.R. Carey in Troy. On 7 July 1908, her corpse was found floating in the Teal Pond, near Sand Lake in New York. Even though her body was found in the water, no water was found in her lungs. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. In the weeks following Hazel's death, everyone that was ever close to her was investigated. The authorities tried to make sense of why someone that was so loved by everyone would end up being brutally killed. Their efforts, however, were wasted, and her murderer was never found. 1. The Zodiac Killings. The Zodiac Killings were a string of murders that occurred in the 1960s and 70s, reminiscent of the Moonlight Killings from the 40s. The Zodiac Killer would attack his victims and then call the police from a payphone nearby to tell them of the crime. He would then write detailed letters explaining details of the attacks and would sometimes even include things from the crime scene. He would sign the letters with the Zodiac Killer, which is where his nickname comes from. The Zodiac Killer attacked a total of 7 people and killed 5 of them, but these were just the confirmed killings. Through his letters to the police and the press, he's claimed to have killed 37 people in total. Throughout the time that he was active, even though he used phones to call the police and sent physical letters to them, and besides the fact that the police interviewed over 2,500 people, they were never able to actually identify anyone. His real identity remains unsolved to this day. That's a wrap for top 10 murders and crimes that were never solved. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Top 10 Best for more videos like this. See you in the next one.